Major Leora Vance stood at the edge of the line. The smell of jet fuel, thick in the early air, and the dull hum of turbines rising as crews worked around her. Noise spilled from every corner of the hangar. Ground personnel shouted across the concrete. Pilots clustered in twos and threes, traded casual jokes. And metal tools clattered against carts as technicians signed off hurried checks. She moved differently. Her gloves were already stained with grease. Her focus narrow as she traced each point on the folded paper checklist in her hand. Its edges were creased into hard lines, oil smudges, darkening the corners. She ran through it the same way she always did, not because anyone demanded it, but because the ritual kept her centered when everything else moved too quickly. Her peers had long ago decided what she was: too methodical, too cautious, too slow to improvise. The words circled quietly but persistently, thrown in passing remarks, or muttered when she was out of earshot. Sometimes the tone carried mockery, sometimes dismissal. Never respect. A captain in the next row laughed with another pilot about making it back early for lunch. When Leora shifted her weight to mark one last box on the checklist, the captain muttered that she could probably find a way to log every blade of grass under the wing if given the chance. She did not answer. She rarely did. The noise rose louder. Engines cycling through warm-ups. The hangar filling with vibration that felt like it was climbing through the soles of her boots. She tucked the checklist into the sleeve pocket of her flight suit, its creases pressing against her arm in a way she had come to expect, like a reminder of what she carried with her. She adjusted the straps on her harness with a slow, deliberate motion. Others moved in flurries, checking with half a glance, brushing through straps without tension. Her hands paused at every point. Buckles clicked in rhythm, measured like the tick of a watch. She breathed once, twice, steady. Months earlier, she had logged a pattern no one else thought worth mentioning. A series of faint anomalies on thermal reports, almost noise. Too irregular to fit a report worth forwarding. She had drawn them out in her notes. Color-coded lines that she tucked between the pages of her own book. Command had skimmed it, shrugged, and moved on. She remembered the glance of one superior who told her not every ripple on a screen required a thesis. She had not argued. She had folded the paper, pressed it flat, and kept it in her own file. She thought of it again now. Though she did not write it down, the hangar lights caught the gleam of the canopy glass as crews swung ladders into place. The noise kept climbing. Layered voices, engines, tools, all colliding into one wall of sound. Leora remained steady in it, her movements slower, quieter, but never uncertain. Where others leaned on chatter and noise, she leaned on silence, folding it around herself like another layer of armor. The overlooked often saw more, she thought, because no one ever tried to drown them in voices. She reached the last strap, checked it, and let the checklist press against her sleeve once more. She was ready. The command room was already heavy with the scent of stale coffee and the faint tang of dust burning in overhead projectors. A map of the region sprawled across the far wall, bright with shifting colors that tracked convoy routes, air corridors, and coded symbols meant to look precise, even when the data behind them wavered. Officers clustered near the projection, voices sharp, clipped, their tone more about confidence than accuracy. Radios hissed faint background chatter from forward scouts, none of it carrying the edge of urgency yet. The air felt like routine, but routine stretched too thin. Brittle enough to crack with one wrong note, Major Leora Vance sat near the back of the room, her flight suit still carrying the faint stain of grease at the knees. The others leaned forward on elbows, trading quick quips when the briefer paused, letting arrogance lace the edges of their fatigue. One lieutenant joked that the only heat blooms out there were likely campfires from shepherds or cooking fires from stragglers. Another added that if they wasted fuel chasing smoke, the real threat would be paperwork from command. The small pocket of laughter that followed filled the room more than the briefing itself. Leora kept her gaze on the map, her pen poised above a notebook balanced on her lap. The briefing officer gestured toward the screen with the end of a rolled-up folder, his words moving fast. He called the irregular heat blooms minor clutter, probably false returns. He repeated the directive twice: maintain fuel discipline. No unnecessary deviations. Do not risk aircraft on curiosities. His tone left no space for argument. His hand traced the corridor along the mountain route, precise in its sweep, but careless in its meaning. The message was clear. Stay in line. Do not improvise. Trust the noise of consensus. Leora wrote anyway. The red ink of her pen cut across the clean paper with slow strokes, careful notations that no one else mirrored. She circled the section of ridge the officer had waved past, drew a line from the convoy path to the faint marks that had been dismissed. She knew how it would look if anyone cared to glance over her shoulder, an unnecessary distraction, a waste of attention. But she trusted the act of writing more than the dismissal in the room. She had seen how fast anomalies disappeared in official memory when no one bothered to record them. The voices around her grew louder, overlapping. Pilots leaned back in their chairs, trading complaints about last week's refueling delays or comparing which crew chief ran the tightest turnaround times. The laughter sharpened the edges of the room, filling spaces where silence could have lived. Commanders exchanged clipped remarks, their certainty doubling back on itself, each voice reinforcing the next. It was not a conversation, but a wall. Behind it, no doubt could breathe. Leora's silence remained intact. She moved her pen again, underlining one figure twice. Red lines on white paper became her own map, separate from the glowing screen at the front. The projector flickered once, briefly dimming the ridge. No one reacted except her. She marked the moment in her notebook. A quick notation beside the red circles. She kept her eyes on the space even after the light steadied again. A superior caught her staring too long and frowned, as if her attention were misdirected. He moved on quickly, his words returning to fuel quotas and procedural reinforcement. Leora bent over her page again, her pen steady. The briefing closed with the usual tone of finality, a barked reminder about chain of command and fuel margins. Chairs scraped as pilots stood. Chatter, resuming as though they were heading to a social rather than a mission. A few threw casual remarks her way, telling her not to get lost, counting tree lines. She folded the notebook slowly, slipped the pen inside, and pressed the cover shut, as though sealing something no one else could see. She did not need their recognition. She carried her own record. True discipline, she thought, was not in following the loudest voice in the room. It was in noticing the patterns no one else bothered to see, and in writing them down before they vanished. The sun pressed hard against the concrete of the flight line, the heat rising in wavering sheets that made the edges of the aircraft shimmer as though they were half submerged. Ground crews moved in every direction, their gestures quick and economical, their words swallowed by the swelling roar of turbines. One by one, the A-10 second came alive, their engines spooling up with a sound that rattled through teeth and bones, like a sandblaster grinding against stone. It was the kind of noise that pilots learned to accept as background, but Major Leora Vance still felt it in her chest every time. She moved with deliberate pace, her gloves already pulled tight, her folded checklist held like a compass against the pull of distraction. Around her, the chatter was constant. Pilots leaned against their cockpits, trading lines about fuel wagers. Who would be first back? Who would owe beer for dragging their feet? Some rushed through their checks, glancing at gauges without writing anything down, trusting muscle, memory, and habit more than procedure. A lieutenant nearby clicked his straps together in seconds, then stretched back and called out that at least one of them was sure to overthink their crosshairs before the mission even began. The remark was aimed at her, his grin wide enough to show it. Laughter followed from two others, already climbing into their cockpits. Leora neither looked nor answered. She pressed the checklist flat, the crease lines hard against her palm, and checked each line again with the tip of her gloved finger. She moved from one strap to the next with no wasted motion. Each buckle clicked into place with precision, her hands pausing for half a breath before moving on. She ran her palm along the harness, feeling for slack. She adjusted her helmet straps until the weight sat centered. Nothing rushed. Nothing skipped. The ritual never changed. And in it, she found the quiet that the noise outside tried to bury. She clipped the checklist to her kneeboard, folding it once more so that only the next sequence of items remained visible. For her, it was less about memory and more about order. The routine held even when the world demanded speed. The tower called for staggered launch. Aircraft rolled forward one at a time, noses lifting into the heavy air, wings cutting through heat waves. Engines bellowed as the formation peeled off in order Das Ennemis. Leora's slot had been placed deliberately last. It was not by chance. She had been left to trail the pack before, and she knew the choice carried meaning. It was a signal that her discipline slowed them down, that her quiet made her less valuable. She accepted the placement without argument, waiting until the others had roared into the sky. Her canopy closed, shutting out most of the chatter. Inside the cockpit, the world became smaller, cleaner. Switches flicked in order. Lights confirmed. Gauges matched against her checklist with measured calm. Outside, the field still buzzed with movement, laughter leaking over the radios. But inside she carried silence. The turbine's vibration pressed through her frame as she eased forward, rolling toward the runway. The checklist pressed against her thigh, the crease hard, a reminder of why she did not hurry. The others could ride noise and banter if they wished. She had silence, and silence never failed her. Her A-10 gathered speed, the roar deepening as the wheels left the ground. She rose last, climbing into the same sky already filled with contrails of her peers. But her ascent was steady, exact. Where they pushed through with eagerness, she carried each step in sequence. To them, it looked like delay. To her, it was the way survival was built. The mountains rose beneath them in jagged sweeps of rock, the ridges pale under the thin light and scored with dust that the wind carried like a living veil. Major Leora Vance kept her aircraft steady, her eyes shifting between the clean flicker of her HUD and the darker shapes along the terrain below. The convoy had not yet entered the pass, and the formation's assignment was simple: hold overhead, maintain fuel discipline, and wait. Simplicity never meant certainty, and she knew better than most how easily routine masked danger. On the comms, the chatter had already begun to sprawl. One pilot boasted about a low approach he had made on the range the week before, claiming his pass had kicked up a storm of dirt and cheers from the ground. Another replied that when they rotated back stateside, he intended to spend the first week eating nothing but steaks. Laughter carried across the net, rough and easy, filling the silence with bravado. Leora did not join. She made a small correction on her stick, adjusting her vector just enough to keep her view aligned with a ridgeline that had been catching her attention since they crossed the border of the pass. Her HUD returned nothing unusual. The lines clean, the shapes unbroken. Yet when she glanced again, the faint bloom of heat flickered against the edges of her thermal overlay, too irregular to belong to sun-heated stone. It was brief, a pulse more than a pattern, but it lodged itself against her instincts. She reached for the pen clipped inside her sleeve, drew her notebook onto the kneeboard, and wrote the coordinates in red. The movement was practiced, quiet, unremarkable to anyone but her. She circled the entry twice, the color sharp against the white page, then folded the notebook back beneath her glove. She broke the silence on comms only once, offering the grid in a flat voice. Her words met static, then laughter. One pilot mocking that she must have spotted a campfire lunch. Command cut across the frequency, tone impatient, instructing the flight to remain focused on the convoy route. No deviation, no wasted fuel. Leora let the response pass. She kept the anomaly marked, the ridge still under her wing. Another aircraft peeled away soon after, its pilot citing fool management. The choice was standard procedure, and no one argued. A second pilot broke formation with a reckless dive, his jet slipping low across the valley floor in a maneuver meant to impress rather than serve purpose. His comms were filled with laughter at his own display. And others cheered the echo of his turbines. Leora did not move. Her aircraft held position. Every adjustment measured, her focus still locked on the ridge that flickered against her instincts, like a shadow threatening to take shape. The sky above them was clear, the air steady. But she felt the fracture forming. Routine could not account for everything. She marked her log again. One more red stroke across the kneeboard. If no one else carried it, she would. Warnings ignored did not vanish. They lived in silence until proven true. The first streak cut the sky so fast it looked like a trick of light. A white trail snapped upward from the ridge, curving in a hard arc toward the convoy winding into the pass. A second followed almost instantly. And then a third. Major Leora Vance's eyes locked on the sudden blossoms of smoke as the lead vehicle erupted in fire. Its frame twisting under the impact, dust rose in a choking wall across the canyon floor. Soldiers scrambled from doors, their movements frantic against the jagged backdrop of stone. The radios exploded with voices. One pilot shouted that the convoy had been hit. Another swore he was already low on fuel and could not risk a pass. Orders overlapped, clipped, and panicked. Call signs stepping on each other until the frequency became a roar of static and fear. A voice from command cut through for a moment, its tone sharp but uncertain, demanding confirmation of the strike and immediate fallback to regroup. No one answered with clarity. Everyone spoke at once. The comms turned into a tangle of noise that carried more desperation than direction. Leora did not add her voice. She pushed her aircraft into a slow, deliberate circle above the canyon, her eyes following the curling trails that still marked the ridgeline. Her fingers brushed against the folded checklist pressed into her sleeve pocket, the crease edges stiff against her arm. The ritual object grounded her, and a reminder of order, even as the world below fractured. She began to mark the ridge positions in her mind, tracing the likely nests where the launchers had fired, building a picture from the chaos. Below, the convoy was stalled. The burning lead truck blocked the narrow road, smoke curling thick enough to obscure the vehicles behind. Soldiers crouched against their tires, weapons raised toward high ground they could not see clearly. The canyon had become a kill zone in an instant. Every advantage tilted toward the unseen attackers. Another pilot called over the net, voice high, insisting the formation break away before they wasted too much fuel. He claimed procedure demanded fallback, that risking aircraft in a compromised zone was reckless. A second echoed the warning, his tone almost pleading. Then came the decisive order from command. All airborne assets pull back. Regroup outside the corridor. Leora held her silence. She steadied her throttle, feeling the vibration of the turbines shiver through the cockpit as she maintained her circle. Her eyes traced the dust plumes still rising from the ridge, noting the rhythm of where fire had come and where it might come again. The checklist pressed steady in her pocket, its presence more comforting than the chaos hammering through her headset. She did not answer the withdrawal call. The formation fractured quickly. Two jets peeled away hard, their engines shrieking as they turned back toward base. Another hesitated before banking wide, his voice trailing excuses about fuel margins and procedural necessity. In seconds, the sky above the canyon thinned, leaving her alone. The chatter continued even as the others retreated, filling the air with explanations and justifications. Leora stayed. She adjusted her angle again, marking each suspected position on the ridge, building a quiet map that no one else was making. Her aircraft cut a steady circle above the smoke and fire, a single presence in a sky that had been abandoned. Where others broke away, she leaned into silence. her calm framed against the confusion that swallowed everyone else. The truest test of discipline was never in routine. It came when routine broke apart, when voices fell to panic and excuses, and when only one pilot chose to remain. Leora Vance circled above the burning convoy, the folded checklist pressed against her sleeve, and carried the silence no one else could hold. Major Leora Vance pushed her aircraft lower, the canyon walls tightening around her as she rolled into the attack vector she had marked in her notebook rather than on her screen. Her HUD remained clean, but the red ink on her kneeboard told her otherwise. She trusted her own hand more than the filtered certainty of the system. With a slow inhale, she pressed the stick forward, the aircraft dipping into a line that would bring her sights across the ridge where smoke still clung in broken threads. The trigger squeeze released the GAU-8 with a roar that split the canyon open. The sound was not sharp but rolling, like the tearing of the earth itself. A deep thunder that vibrated through metal and bone. Tracers stitched the ridgeline, sparks bursting from rock. And then the shadowed nest gave way. Soil and stone, collapsing over the shape of a launcher crew. Dust surged upward, curling into the already thick air. The convoy below caught the space she opened and lurched forward. Vehicles grinding past the burned wreck of the lead truck. The radios erupted again. One pilot still circling wide called her reckless, demanding to know if she was trying to get herself grounded. Another warned that her fuel margins were already stretched and she would never make it back if she stayed. Their words overlapped, loud, with certainty. Each one meant to cover fear with the posture of discipline. Leora answered with silence. She pulled into a climb, steady hands, easing the stick back, then shifted her grip only long enough to write a quick note in her log. Her pen scratched a line across the page ridge, one cleared. Below, soldiers had dismounted from the convoy. Rifles raised toward angles they could not reach. Through their eyes, her A-10 was not reckless. It was the only thing breaking open a path. They watched the cannon fire tear the ridge and felt the weight lift, however briefly. From their pinned position, dust and smoke clouded their view, but they saw her passes carve space where none existed. Each run measured, each strike placed with care rather than speed. She turned again, marking a second ridgeline with her own notes before aligning for another pass. The GAU-8 answered her command once more, its voice filling the corridor as though nothing else could exist. The comms filled with more warnings, more procedures cited, but they receded into noise. For Leora, the silence was inside. The quiet that lived between her breathing and the marks she set on the page. The ritual of her notes continued even in the center of battle, each entry proof of precision that no report would ever log. Procedure existed to protect the institution. She had learned that across years of training and reprimands, but precision existed to protect lives. And in that narrow canyon, the difference became clear. She carried the silence of action, while others carried the noise of distraction. And in her silence, the convoy began to move again. Major Leora Vance's cockpit shook with the steady vibration of the turbines as she angled her jet back into the corridor. The fuel gauge flickered, its needle sliding between low and mid, like a pendulum unwilling to commit. She tapped it once with a gloved finger, though she already knew the truth. Margins were collapsing. The others had withdrawn, leaving only her engines to fill the canyon with their drone. The radios had gone quiet except for the clipped, impersonal tone of command reminding all aircraft to regroup. She left her transmitter off. Silence was the only space she trusted now. Below, the convoy was still in pieces. A second truck had been hit, its frame skewed sideways against the canyon wall. Soldiers crouched low behind what metal cover they could find, rifles flashing in bursts that did little to reach the ridge above them. They fired anyway, each muzzle flare a sign they had not given up, even if their angles were hopeless. Dust curled around their boots. Smoke pressed down from the burning vehicles, and the pass that should have been a route forward had become a trap that tightened with every minute. Leora rolled her aircraft into another dive, the canyon rushing upward, the ridgeline filling her sight. She did not wait for clean confirmation. Her hands were steady on the stick, her breathing slow enough to match the rhythm of her heart. The Ga-8 opened with its thunder, stitching the ridge with light and tearing another scar into the stone. She pulled up hard, climbing back through smoke that smeared across her canopy. The gauge flickered again when she leveled, flashing lower this time, as though mocking her decision to stay. Her eyes dropped briefly to the kneeboard. Red ink marked across the page where she had logged each pass, each strike. The pen strokes looked familiar. The same careful precision she had used months ago when logging anomalies no one else cared about. The memory came sharp. Uninvited the conference room with its hard light. The superior officer frowning down at her reports. He had told her she was overanalyzing, wasting time, trying to make meaning out of noise. He had slid her pages aside with a dismissive hand, red ink under his palm, the same color she carried now in her cockpit. The reprimand echoed against the silence. As real as the turbine whine in her ears, she heard his voice telling her to cut the habit, to trust the system instead of her own eyes. She let the voice hang for a moment, then marked another line on the kneeboard with deliberate pressure. The red cutting across white in defiance, she circled the position she had just cleared. A small act of proof that could not be erased by someone else's hand. The convoy shifted below. Soldiers moved with hurried gestures, dragging wounded to cover. Engines coughing back to life as drivers forced disabled trucks aside to clear the path. The canyon was still hostile, fire still flashing from hidden points. But they had space to breathe again. They had it because she stayed in the loop, because she kept diving when others pulled back. Her cockpit held only the sound of the turbines and her own breathing. No laughter, no chatter, no reprimands, just silence and the proof she carved into ridges and pages alike. What had once been labeled hesitation was revealed in the fire of her passes as discipline, discipline forged under scrutiny and carried alone into a corridor no one else dared hold. Smoke pressed against the canyon like a living wall, curling over stone and bleeding into the thin air until even the ridges seemed to dissolve. From within, it came fire again. Fresh trails streaking from hidden nests, flashes that clawed down toward the convoy, forcing its retreat. Major Leora Vance lowered her nose, the weight of her A-10 pulling her into the canyon's throat. Her full light blinked, a steady red pulse at the edge of her vision. She did not look away from the ridge. The comms were frantic now. Command barked over the net, their tone clipped, strained, repeating the same order: break off. Conserve fuel. Regroup. One pilot still circling far from the canyon added his voice, urging her to follow procedure before she made herself a casualty. Their words stacked into noise, each one louder than the last. Her channel remained cold. She had nothing to give them but silence. She rolled the aircraft lower, wings brushing against the edge of minimum clearance. The canyon wall rushing past so close that the vibrations shook stone dust loose in her wake. Her gloved hands stayed steady, guiding the stick with a precision that turned each movement into calculation. The Ga-8 thundered again, its sound deeper here, trapped between stone walls until it became a rolling quake that sent rocks tumbling down the ridges. The tracers cut across the nests that had fired seconds before, tearing them open with surgical ferocity. Below, the convoy surged forward in staggered bursts, vehicles weaving through smoke and fire. Soldiers ran alongside, dragging wounded, their movements timed to the rhythm of her passes. Every time her cannon stitched the ridge, they advanced another stretch, trusting her shadow overhead to hold the corridor open. Their radios echoed with urgency, not for her ears, but for their survival. Yet she matched their pace all the same. Her cockpit filled with heat, sweat traced along her hairline. Sliding beneath the rim of her helmet, the blinking fuel warning pulsed against the corner of her vision. Relentless. She acknowledged it with a single glance. Then let her focus return to the ridge. A careful exhale steadied her breathing, the kind of breath drilled into her long before she was ever trusted with live ordnance. Where others saw recklessness in her choice to stay, she found only discipline, sharpened to a razor edge by years of being told she was too slow, too cautious. That caution, turned now into precision, made her impossible pass hold. Command shouted again, their voice breaking into a near yell, insisting she was endangering her aircraft, her life. Their mission log, she kept her transmitter silent. Orders could not reach her in this space. The only dialogue here was between her aircraft and the canyon, between her gunfire and the ground retreating beneath it. Silence had become her final act of authority. Louder than anything, command could shout. She pulled level again, just feet above the canyon floor, then climbed with a sharp roll that carried her back along the retreating convoy. Her eyes caught the figures below, soldiers waving their arms as if signaling thanks, though the gesture would never make it into any official record. She timed her next burst of fire to cover their vehicles, clearing the last choke point, the ridges behind them collapsing into dust as her tracers ripped the stone apart. Her fuel light blinked faster now, an urgent strobe across the cockpit. But she did not waver. She pressed the checklist tighter into her sleeve, its crease lines sharp, grounding her. One final pass. One final stretch of cover that was the promise she gave without speaking. Endurance and patience, once mocked as hesitation, had become the edge that cut open escape. When the convoy cleared the canyon, it did so under her silence, carried by the impossible precision of the pilot who stayed longer than anyone else, dared. Major Leora Vance pulled her aircraft out of the corridor only after the last vehicle of the convoy cleared the pass. Smoke still lingered in the air, drifting back into the canyon like a reluctant tide. Her fuel warning flashed steady red, the gauge so low that every vibration in the frame felt like it might be the last. She kept her breathing calm, guiding the A-10 into open sky with deliberate restraint, her silence holding even as command voices droned across the net. The official tone carried no names, no thanks, only the cold line. Unidentified support asset assisted. The convoy's comms, clipped and raw, carried relief that never reached her directly. She let them go. Her transmitter remained off. Her proof was written instead in the log across her kneeboard. With her glove, she marked the entry anomaly deliberate. The ink smudged faintly where her hand dragged. But the meaning held. She closed the notebook with care, pressing the cover flat against the curve of her leg. Back on the line, the shutdown was quiet. Her canopy open to air, still heavy with turbine smell. But the chatter of the hangar seemed subdued. The other pilots glanced her way only briefly, their faces caught between dismissal and unease. Some looked down as if to hide their expressions. No one spoke. She unstrapped in silence, her boots finding the concrete, her body moving with the same deliberate order she carried into flight. The notebook stayed in her hand, its pages creased, ink red and final. No report would bear her name. No commendation would note her precision. The institution would let her action dissolve into background, because that was easier than admitting its blindness. She knew this. Yet she carried the proof herself. And that was enough. Recognition could fade. Records could be erased. What remained was the quiet certainty of what she had done, and the fact that she had written it where no one could take it away. The official logs were already sealed before Major Leora Vance returned to her quarters. The sortie had been stamped as peripheral support, the phrase chosen carefully to suggest presence without consequence. In the command room, she knew the debate had circled her name, though not to grant credit. The question was only whether she had disobeyed by refusing to break off when ordered. The consensus had been simple: record, nothing. Assign no blame. Let the silence erase what could not be explained. That silence followed her into the mess hall. The cafeteria lights were harsh against stainless counters. the smell of reheated rations clinging to the air. Pilots sat in clusters at the tables, voices low. But when she stepped through the line and carried her tray into the room, the tone shifted. The chatter dulled, as though her presence bent it down. A few glances flicked toward her. Sharp, curious, and quickly hidden again. She chose a corner table, sat, and began to eat with the same methodical patience she carried into flight. Halfway through her meal, footsteps approached. A young crew chief, still in his coveralls, stopped at the edge of her table. His voice was quiet, unpracticed, almost awkward. He asked if it was true she had stayed past bingo fuel, circling above the convoy when everyone else had turned back. He did not look at her directly when he asked. His tone carried no bravado, only the kind of respect that does not need ceremony. She answered with a single nod and returned to her food. For him, it was enough. He left with a faint, thoughtful expression, the kind of look that would carry a story further than any log entry could. The whispers began in the spaces where official reports could not reach, in hangar corners, over tool carts, between pilots during quiet hours. They said the cautious one had stayed. They said the backup, the one always placed last in formation, had been the reason a convoy was not lost. Her call sign, last in, once muttered with mockery for her methodical pace, began to shift, spoken softer now. The phrase carried an edge of respect, as if the name had revealed its true meaning only after she had lived it. Leora finished her meal, set down her fork, and sat a moment longer in the quiet corner. She knew medals would not follow, nor lines in a briefing. What endured was smaller, but sharper. The whisper of a call sign no longer meant as insult, but as recognition. Silence had carried her through the corridor, and silence would carry her legacy.